Hello, and welcome to the ThinkJSOU webinar series, brought to you by the Office for Strategic Engagement. Today, we are pleased to present a distinguished speaker. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of the U.S. Government, Department of Defense, or JSOCOM. If you have questions after this session, please email thinkjsou@jsou.edu.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mitch Wander. I'm delighted to host a timely author interview today on behalf of JSOU's College of Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. I joined JSOU several years ago to help a team develop a planning course about cyberspace and special operations. Since then, we've conducted our cyberspace and special operations course twice a year. I have contributed as one of the instructors for every course we've run. During the course, we enable SOF professionals, mostly planners, to consider how cyber operations and related capabilities can present effective military options for the commander. We considered the U.S. government's approach to cyber operations and many common terms in cyberspace planning. When students finish our course, they provide the command with capable planners who can use and integrate cyberspace operations to support SOF missions. We're fortunate today to have Dr. Shay Hershkovitz, just 5 weeks after he released his book, The Future of National Intelligence: How Emerging Technologies Reshape Intelligence Communities. His book made an easy choice for a thought-provoking discussion tailored to the special operations community. How so? You don't need to believe him or me. Instead, I'd like to share 2 excerpts from the most recent SOCOM Commander Posture Statement to the Senate Armed Services Committee in April 2022. Our previous commander, General Richard D. Clark, talks about the criticality of emerging technologies, intelligence, and effective decision-making to SOF. General Clark talks about investing in a data-driven future. He said, U.S. SOCOM continues to serve as pathfinder within DoD for integrating data-driven technologies, leveraging artificial intelligence powered by machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, and similar cutting-edge technologies. Our early work with DoD's Project Maven expanded our understanding of data collection and algorithm development, leading to successive service-led initiatives. We are modernizing into a data-enabled command, employing cloud, data, and AI technologies throughout our operations from the tactical edge to strategic decision-making. General Clark adds, several enterprise-wide initiatives further support U.S. SOCOM's data transformation, especially with respect to mission command, intelligence fusion, and business activities. Equipping our workforce with a modern cloud computing environment is equally critical to developing and deploying AI enterprise-wide. Additionally, our recent data strategy implementation plan outlines the ways and means for SOF to harness the power of data across our activities globally. Shay, in his book, creates a sense of urgency for reshaping the intelligence community by embracing emerging technology. First, we must understand these technologies and their challenges for the intelligence community. Then we must deliberately design a path forward that overcomes any barriers to change and integrate new structures and processes for an intelligence community of the future, the one we need. SOF depends on the intelligence community day in and day out. Today's book discussion looks at where the intelligence community needs to be. Thank you, Shay, for joining this ThinkJSOU discussion.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
In your book, you give the reader a scene setter by describing your early exposure to intelligence. You recount that on that cold November morning in 1994, at 18 years old, you started basic training as an Israeli Defense Forces draftee, preparing for Military Intelligence Corps. Most vividly, you tell the story about the first time you had access to sensitive information. You sat in front of a green-screened VAX workstation and saw line-by-line scrolling text, endless text, no pictures, just text. Like me, your early career relied on the dawn of widely available network computing. And now you've written a book challenging the intelligence community to advocate for radical change driven by cutting-edge information technology. Many professionals get used to the day's technology and try to make the most of it. As a result, sometimes more seasoned professionals are the last to realize that technology is leaping ahead of their work. In addition, you observe that technology is often viewed as a unitary object. A problem, since there are many categories of technology, each with its own characteristics relating to the intelligence environment and profession. At the same time, you emphasize that the various categories of technology create effects on each other. You consider their relationship as codependencies. What caused you to embark on this journey to explore how emerging technologies might drive the need for change in intelligence processes? And for us to understand more about your framework, why were certain technologies chosen as your focus?
Great question, Mitch. So I started my career post my military service in the management consulting and market research industries. Naturally, I did a lot of future of studies, for example, future of money, future of insurance, and so on and so forth. And as a former intelligence officer and national security practitioner and academic, I was involved in several future of national security studies as well. For example, I led a project around the future of NATO, future of policing, and so forth. So tech has always been there when discussing the future of a certain industry or a certain domain, but that wasn't the focus. Only when I came to the X Prize Foundation as the head of research, I started focusing on emerging technologies. So a word about X Prize. So it's a nonprofit based out of LA. They do multi-year, multi-million-dollar competitions, basically to incentivize innovators from around the world to come up with technological solutions to humanity's, to solve humanity's biggest challenges. As the head of research, my role was basically to identify and discuss and analyze emerging technologies. And emerging tech is basically the business of the X Prize Foundation. So I become interested in emerging technologies and specifically their implications to national security, and more specifically to intelligence. And around the same time, I started for the first time experimenting with artificial intelligence. I had a team of some 30 odd super talented analysts, and we did multiple studies at any given moment. And the question was, how can I, together with my team, make better analysis faster, on time, and on budget? So I figured, since I'm dealing with emerging technologies, let's start experimenting with artificial intelligence. That led me to adopt research-driven artificial intelligence platform. So basically, platforms that using AI assist you in conducting better, thorough research. That prompted me to think, okay, what would be the implications of using such platforms for intelligence work? And that basically was the beginning of my intellectual journey that ultimately led me to writing the book. So the book discusses several technologies. It discusses big data, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, cloud storage, 5G, IoT, so Internet of Things, blockchain, quantum computing, and crowdsourcing, which is not technology per se, but it is reliant on information technology. Why did I choose these technologies and not others? Well, that's a good question. Well, the book is primarily for decision makers. It's not an academic book per se. And I didn't want it to go too deep into the future. Otherwise, it would. I figured it will be too theoretical. I wanted to advise decision makers on how to make this digital transformation in the context of intelligence organizations. And I picked technologies that are already available in various degrees of maturity, obviously, but technologies that we can actually start using today. So that basically led me to the list of technologies that I just mentioned. Now, I also wanted to focus on how these technologies shape intelligence and intelligence work, and less on how these technologies shape challenges, mainly threats, that intelligence organizations face. First, there's a lot of literature about this topic, And that entails a book of its own, just to discuss the changing nature of challenges and threats and so forth. So I left outside of the scope of the book basic technologies such as 3D printing, bioterrorism, basically all kinds of new technologies that reshape threats. But yes, there are other technologies that are already affect intelligence work, which are not mentioned in the book or not discussed in the book. Sometimes they are mentioned, but not too deeply. And these technologies will continue to shape intelligence work in the near and long future. For example, augmented reality, so AR, virtual reality, mixed reality. These are just few examples of technologies that I'm not discussing in the book, but has tremendous implications to intelligence work. But I see these technologies as more operational in nature. So how do they affect intelligence operations? And I wanted to focus the book on the strategic national level. And this is basically why I chose the technologies that I mentioned.
It's certainly fair to pick things that make your work clearer and more actionable for decision makers. And I think the reader gets that. You've made a strong case why you picked what you did pick, and that you got to draw the line somewhere, that not everything can be within scope.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you always need to decide what's in and what's out, basically to drive your argument. So I wanted to focus on technologies that radically change the foundations of intelligence communities, and the technologies mentioned in the book do just that.
Yeah. Speaking of radical change, you acknowledge you're not alone by insisting that the intelligence community must change, and certainly not just with minor tweaks here and there. None other than the former U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, stated in 2018 that the intelligence community doesn't need an evolution, it needs a revolution. These are strong words. When he said these words, he served as the executive head of the U.S. intelligence community. In your book, you intentionally look at a combination of threats and technology that would break new ground. I'd like to walk through the scope of your research. On the threat side, you avoid the typical threats already well known to the intelligence community, such as weapons of mass destruction and terrorism. To go beyond these usual threats, you propose two criteria. One, new threats that, in your words, have not been at the core of Western intelligence activities. And two, threats that cannot be addressed through existing organizational structures, operating concepts, and capabilities. This leads you to three identified threats related to emerging new technologies. First, technology affects the hearts and minds of individuals and groups. Second, there's a danger of falling behind in tech, what you call a technological arms race. And third, broad danger to human security because of climate change and pandemics. In recent years, have you seen the seeds of institutional acceptance by the US or allies for the types of radical changes that seemingly both you and former Director Coates deem necessary? And what is your assessment as to how effectively current intelligence community constructs can affect these threats? In other words, how big is the gap?
Great question. So you know what they say, necessity is a matter of invention. And over the last few years, as an observer, obviously, I've started noticing that the calls for radical transformation became much more mainstream than they used to. You can hear current and former intelligence executives basically for a call for such a change, for a dramatic change, and not just incremental improvements. So that's good news. What really drives this radical transformation, in my opinion, isn't just the availability of the technologies that we mentioned, and others, of course. These technologies have been around for a relatively long time. What really drives the change in the mindset of intelligence executive is what I see as a perfect storm. This is a unique point in time where threats and challenges are closely connected to, if not driven by, technology, and that is the main driver for this realization. So, take for example, deep fake and the use of social media to pose threat to democracies. It's all about technologies, or the technology enables such attempts. The tech arms race that you mentioned, like we see these days with China, for example, is a new arena for global struggle over dominance and power. And climate change and pandemic pose threats to human security. And I think that what the COVID pandemic has taught us is that the current capabilities, work processes, structures, and so forth are not adequate to tackle such challenges. We need a better or a different mindset, frameworks, organization structures, and so on and so forth. So this is the perfect storm, in my opinion, especially the last 2 or 3 years. Now, I want to give you one example that might be a bit mundane, but I think it really captures the magnitude of the change. So take, for example, remote work, something that is was unheard of prior to the COVID pandemic, right? In the context of intelligence organizations. How can you discuss classified information without attending physically in the same room together? But this has changed, and what prompted this change was basically COVID. These organizations needed to keep on working under extreme conditions of quarantine and so on, and lockdown and all, and so on and so forth. And they needed to find a solution. And there are solutions to enable remote work in the context of classified environment. And this is one minor change, but basically it proves to show the argument that the time is right for radical transformation. Now, this should have happened years ago, but government organizations, and especially organizations that tend to be very traditional, very conservative, i.e. intelligence and national security organizations, they move very slowly. And it takes some time, a lot of time actually, to realize that the times are changing, and you need to kind of shift the course of this huge shift, and that takes time. What I'm very happy to see is that, as I mentioned, executives understand the zeitgeist, the magnitude of the change needed. It started with resistance, obviously, incremental changes, adjustments, but now we are at the point where people understand that these changes are not enough, and we need to take a much more aspirational and dramatic approach to digital. But the usability of what one can do with these technologies, it becomes much more off the shelf, less intimidating, and much easier to adopt. Take, for example, language models such as GPT-3. Up until recently, let's say probably a year ago or so, if you wanted to experiment with GPT-3, you needed to be a real maven in artificial intelligence, and specifically natural language processing. Today, there's an easy access, and you can start conversing with a machine. So to speak, you can basically start talking with a machine and get answers and on pretty mundane issues, and so that also drives this change among intelligence executives. Also important to highlight is the generational shift. So for boomers such as myself, so Generation X, we become less relevant, less prominent in these organizations. Looking at millennials and Gen Zs, they're basically the backbone of these organizations, and they start climbing up the ladder. And they are digital natives, so they know what one can do with these technologies. Pretty easy for them to understand what you can do and what you cannot do with these technologies, and how to use them, and how to integrate them into your day-to-day work. And so with this and I think that this generational shift also enables this radical transformation. One more thing worth mentioning, and I've seen that time and time again, both in the context of the USIC, but also elsewhere, for example, in Israel, the gap to these days is less conceptual, But even if you go back 3, 4, 5 years, you can still see the old or hear or read the old guard kind of rejecting these new technologies, alerting that it's morally wrong to rely on AI, and we'll discuss that later today, and basically object such a change. And I think that even the techno-pessimists, so to speak, started to realize that there are some benefits in adopting emerging technologies and integrating them in the day-to-day work of intelligence.
Yeah, it's very interesting too that you're describing different factors that are outside the direct control of the intelligence community or the government, things like COVID, things like generational shifts. These are things that are happening and that we need to understand and really figure out how they affect the intelligence community and how they affect our use of technology. But we really can't walk away from them. They're going to happen regardless of what we do or don't do. In your view of where we are right now, the relationship between technology and intelligence has become a complex problem. You state that you don't see technology as the only driving force for intelligence organizations to transform themselves. You see technology also as an enabler itself. Why is it so important to view technology as both a driver and an enabler of change?
Yeah, so another way to frame that is to see technology as the driving force of most new threats, challenges, and so forth, but also the fact that decision makers now understand that the solution actually lies within these technologies. And in some respect, to really harness these technologies, organizations need to restructure themselves in a way that fits technological capabilities. So to put it differently, you can see technology as a driving force of these changes, but you can also use technologies to take ICs, intelligence communities, to the next level, to overcome problems and challenges created by these technologies themselves, and other drivers as well. Let me give you an example. So we are all aware of the fact that there is abundance of data, and that the problem that intelligence organizations face these days is not lack of data, but rather simply put, there's too much data. So how do you sift through this data? So this problem basically is created by technology. For example, with Internet of Things, it creates more data because data is streamed from my fridge, my car, and of course myself. 5G allows for the transformation of or the distribution of that data. Now, if you use AI, you can use AI to collect even more data, because data is basically the life of AI. The more data you have, the better and more accurate the AI models are, and they can create and collect more data and generate new stuff. So there's a vicious cycle here, right? You use technology, and this technology basically intensifies the problem of data abundance. But at the same time, AI can help you tackle this challenge of what do I do with this data? And you can use AI basically to sift through the data, to identify patterns, et cetera, et cetera. You can use AI to generate automatically intelligence reports. Not too deep still, but at the information level, AI can do the trick for you and write the reports for you. And same goes, by the way, with quantum computers. And I want to give you another example here. So I think most of our listeners know that quantum computers can radically transform the cybersecurity industry and concepts and technology and all of that, right? Because if you start using the huge compute power of quantum computers, basically it makes all encryption obsolete. That's it. You can basically hack everything because of what quantum computers can do. So here's a case where a technology creates a challenge. But on the same token, this technology can also solve the challenge or tackle the challenge, because now you can start using quantum. Not now. It's a few years away, but you will be able to use quantum computers not just to decrypt and to hack systems, but to also create new ways of encryption that are more resistant to attempts to hack them by quantum computers. So again, these are the two sides of the same token. Kind of a yin-yang approach, where you have technology that creates new problems, but also allows you to tackle the problems. On that note, I just want to add one more point here. I previously mentioned techno-pessimists, but the other side of the token is techno-optimists. So the techno-pessimists tend to see technology as a source of all evil. If we will start using, and the more we become reliant on emerging technologies, the more we will alienate, humans. We won't be able to enjoy the benefits of human cognition and all of that. And this is why they try to push back on adopting new technologies. The other side of this equation is the techno-optimists that say, well, with artificial intelligence, for example, we can make the work of intelligence much easier. I remember a few years ago, I was asked to peer review an article, and the title was, "How can AI help us preventing wars?" I don't think that AI can help anyone in preventing anything. Ultimately, humans have to be in the loop. So AI is a tool that we can use, much like we use pencils and laptops and cell phones and whatnot. And so this approach also, my approach, this yin-yang approach, is also relevant for this debate between techno-optimists and techno-pessimists. There are always trade-offs. So you need to take what technology can, you need to understand what technology can do, can help you to do. But you also need to understand what are the perils of this technology.
It sounds like we need a little bit of a mixture between the techno-optimists and the techno-pessimists, and that there's some value in hearing what each group has to say in order to drive this way ahead that we need.
Absolutely. Reality is always complex. You can't really present just one facet of reality. It's always multi-layered. And you need to bring everything into account when analyzing, in the context of my book, The Future of Intelligence. There is no good without the bad, and there is no bad without the good.
I want to look back several decades, as you did in your book, to see the historical context for where we are now with the U.S. intelligence community and many Western intelligence communities. You said that in the 50s, the U.S. intelligence community became what you describe as a central component in American activities against the Soviet threat, especially the Soviet nuclear plan. Electronic intelligence, ELINT, became a significant contributor, with the U-2 spy plane beginning service in 1954 and the Corona satellite starting in 1960. And a point that becomes noteworthy only decades later is that the national security establishment drove these innovations, in contrast to the present, when private sector firms sell numerous commercial satellite-based collection services. You assess that this early reliance on technology represented an approach focused on filling information gaps. More or better collection, often through technical means, could overcome shortcomings in American understanding of Soviet strategy. You even labeled this approach an addiction to technology at the expense of other approaches, such as improving how we interpret or act on information, also referred to as sense-making. How did the U.S. intelligence community, and for the most part, all Western intelligence services, develop, at least then, a technology addiction or over-reliance?
So that's a very interesting story. But before I'll get to that, let me just mention that it's not a unique case for the U.S. intelligence community. My first book dealt with the emergence of the Israeli intelligence community back in the 50s and the 60s. And I noticed the same phenomena that I will describe now. So let's go back to the early days of the Cold War. There was the missile gap. Nobody knows exactly what's happening behind the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Iron Curtain. And some of the questions that concerned the American IC were technological in nature. So, for example, what's the range of the missiles? What are the nuclear capabilities? Now, at the same time, and as a direct result of military innovation during World War II, new technology became available. New means of communications, for example, paved the way for communication intelligence, which is a discipline. Radars that are attached to every missile paved the way for electronic intelligence, ELINT. Aerial platforms paved the way for visual intelligence, and so on and so forth. By the way, it's interesting to see that most of these innovations came from the government or governments, and not from the private sector. In contrast to what's happening these days. But that's just a side note. Anyways, intelligence as an organization needed to justify itself and basically ask for more resources, which is, by the way, it's not a unique situation. It's part of politics wherever you are on the globe. But it was a situation of a perfect storm. On the one hand, you have new challenges, and on the other hand, you have new technologies that can seemingly tackle these challenges. So the IC said, and I'm not verbatim, but this is what they said: we can overcome this information gap. Just give me the budget. I will develop new capabilities, i.e. sensors and so forth, i.e. technologies, and I will make the gap disappear. It's just a matter of obtaining the relevant information. The information is out there. This is what expresses the concept of collection in the intelligence cycle, right? You have collection. What does collection imply? It implies that there is information scattered out there, and I just need to collect it. How do I do that? I just need as many sensors as I can get. How do I get these sensors? Well, I need to develop them, and that really depends on the budget that I get. So this is the story, and the answer or the gap could be bridged if only we have more eyes, more ears, and so on and so forth. Okay, that was the argument. But that led to two main problems. First, addiction to data. Again, the problem is lack of data. There are ways to get the data, and with enough sensors, I will find the data. So addiction to data, as if this was the gap, and I would argue that wasn't the problem. I'll get to that in a minute. And addiction to tech. Why to tech? Because, well, the more technology that we have, the better we can collect the better and faster we can collect the data. But in fact, all intelligence failures, from Wallstatter's book on Pearl Harbor, the 9/11 debacle, and even the Yom Kippur surprise, all these failures stem not from lack of data, but from the problem of lack of sense making. There was always enough data. Question is, what did people do with the data to prevent such strategic surprises? So, but problem is that sense making is not that sexy as technology. It's more about cognitive processes. It's more about methodologies. Sometimes it's kind of meta questions, theoretical, if not philosophical questions. And finally, it's not attached to big budgets. And so you see this addiction. Still, there's an addiction to data and technologies. But my argument is that if we really want to solve the challenge, or to correctly tackle the challenges that ICs face these days, it's more about allowing humans to do what humans do best, which is sense making, and freeing them from this tedious work of collecting information and things of that sort that machines can do much better than humans.
So it's really not an easy option to go to those that give out resources and say, I need better sense making, as opposed to saying, I need a better satellite or some other technical collection to solve the world's problems.
Exactly, because then what are you asking for? You're not asking for necessarily for budgets, right? You're asking for something else, which is much more fundamental.
Well, in that same manner, you look at various interrelated technologies and give us 5 conclusions about why emerging technology creates significant problems for the intelligence community. And I want to just list what those 5 are. 1, the exponential growth of data presents storage and analysis difficulties. 2, adversaries can mix false data into already massive amounts of information. 3, there are both old and new types of information, so sense-making for decision makers becomes more challenging to provide. 4, decision makers themselves access more data and therefore expect the IC to produce higher level deliverables. And 5, the intelligence community needs a new concept to replace the intelligence cycle, which will leverage a dynamic, if not chaotic, operating environment. How do these 5 conclusions fit together to define the problem?
Great question. So going back to my previous argument, there is no shortage of data. On the contrary, there is an abundance of data, and it will only grow with technologies such as IoT and AI and so on and so forth. The more data that AI has, the better it becomes, so it can generate more data. To that, we need to add our adversaries' ability to create new types of data, fake data, that looks exactly like the real thing. So that only adds to the problem. And data is available to all. It's created rapidly by anyone and can be easily consumed by anyone. So the problem now, like in the past, but on a much greater scale, is about sense making. Given all this data, what can I make of it? So take decision makers, for example. They read the news more often than they read intelligence reports, and they are bombarded with data, and they have very little time to digest this data flow and to turn what they absorb into actionable insights. So intelligence is competing not only with CNN, that's not new, but with Twitter. And these days with Mastodon, which is the new social media platform and the alternative to Twitter. So basically, what intelligence organizations need to do these days is to reinvent themselves and understand what's their competitive edge. And they need to think in kind of business terms as competition and competitive edge and positioning and things of that sort. And this is exactly what they need to do. Not to give more data. There's no problem with data. The IC need to make sense of the data. They need to produce actionable insights and to help decision makers in creating their mental models, help them, thinking, assisting them in asking the right questions, and sometimes even challenge the decision makers' implicit and explicit hypothesis. This is their competitive edge, in my opinion. But the problem with this approach is, and you mentioned that, is that the intelligence cycle still determines how intelligence work is done, at least conceptually. In reality, it's you can see that the cycle is less valid than it used to. But when you ask people to describe intelligence work, the very first thing that they do is describing the intelligence cycle. The problem with the intelligence cycle is that it's less relevant for this day and age because it's too linear in nature. It's too slow. It creates this artificial dichotomies between collection and analysis. Take, for example, cyber activities. When you penetrate a certain system, right? What do you do? If you try to put that under all the components of the intelligence cycle, are you collecting information? Are you doing something basically to plant false information? If you really want to penetrate these systems, if you really want to suck the information that you need to have a certain degree of analysis, and everything is done in relatively small teams. So where is the intelligence cycle? in in this environment. My argument is that it has become obsolete. It was very powerful back in the days of the Cold War and so forth, when the world was less fluid. In this day and age, with the abundance of data, emerging technologies, the chaotic nature of the world, including adversaries, the intelligence cycle is no longer a relevant concept for intelligence work.
I wanted to go back to something that you said that was a wonderful choice of words when you were earlier describing the needed relationship between government intelligence resources and private sector intelligence resources. You said that it's really not competition or cooperation, it's a positioning question. You used a marketing term to really illustrate the delicate balance between how government and private sector will need to work together to make this all function properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that there's a lot that we can learn from as intelligence practitioners, a lot that we can learn from the private sector. For example, there is no clear dichotomy that separates us from them. Sometimes, Apple competes with Google. Sometimes they collaborate on various activities and so forth. And every company tries to position itself vis-a-vis the competition, right? To find their own value proposition, if you will. And I think intelligence organizations, given the complexity of the environment in which they operate, they need to adapt the same mindset and think about competition, collaboration, removing walls, removing barriers, and understand that they're competing on the attention of the decision makers. And since this is a competition, you need to figure out your role in this competition, what makes you unique, and how to find the best way to get their consumers, another word that I dislike, but their consumers' attention.
Yeah, certainly if you go to any intelligence organization, the room is filled with private sector equipment, private sector services, the complex interrelationship between the government and the private sector is something that can never really be turned back. It's alive and it's in every intelligence community's physical infrastructure and the information that they get. Yeah,
but it stands against the basic instincts of intelligence professionals, right? They want to create barriers because they work in in a very sensitive environment. They don't want to share information. They don't want to grant access to their platforms and so forth. But again, it's less relevant for this day and age.
Yeah. In relation to national intelligence, the technologies that attracted your interest are Internet of Things and 5G using cloud storage, big data analytics, artificial intelligence to retrieve insights, crowdsourcing to expand collection, and blockchain for secure communications. Let's look at a few of these. On the topic of big data analytics, you highlight an experiment conducted by Google and published in 2009. Researchers challenged a computer to find early indicators of a flu outbreak. The computer crunched the data, proceeded without any hypothesis, and identified search terms able to more effectively predict the following year's flu outbreaks compared to other methods. This leverages correlation instead of seeking causation. Then, regarding artificial intelligence, Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3, GPT-3, is a deep learning language model that produces human-like text that you mentioned earlier. Then GPT-4 will, in the next couple of years, conduct actual reasoning and understanding. These capabilities, used for good purposes, will generate usable texts comparable to a human analyst. Or if used for malicious purposes, the same capabilities will generate deepfake documents to deceive analysts. What could big data analytics and AI accomplish if applied to national intelligence challenges?
So there are scores of applications. I'll give you a more of a tactical example. So you can use AI in augmented reality for clandestine operations. For example, if you need to a translation in real time, you can put it on a helmet or glasses or whatever technology that will be developed, and that will give you the ability to converse with in foreign languages. And that's just one example and there are startups that work on such technologies. You can use bots, again, AI, to infiltrate closed online extremist groups, to pretend to be, a terrorist or a member in such a group, and that'll make things much easier compared to such human activity. You can conduct PSYOPs by using generative AI. It's not just our adversaries. We can also do that. But most importantly, at the national or the strategic level, AI can free humans to do what humans do best, which is asking questions, building mental models, rooting insights in specific context, understanding the world in which decision makers operate. This is something that AI cannot do. So to put it differently, to contextualize the data and information and the insights that machines can basically produce, but without a real context. Now, I have no doubt that artificial general intelligence, or AGI, will be able to do that in the future, but we're not there just yet. Some argue that we won't get there at all. I tend to be more optimistic, if optimism is the right word here. But and that basically will create a new host of questions. Do we want to allow machines to do that for us in matters of life and death? Do we want to involve AI and rely on AI, especially when AI will be able to reason and to even recommend certain actions that, recommendations that basically stem from analysis. But I don't trouble myself with these questions because we're not there just yet, and it's going to be a different world, different generation, different norms and ethics. Important questions, but again, it's not in my opinion, the foreseeable future. For now, artificial intelligence can basically free humans from the tedious work of collecting and arranging data and trying to find patterns and anomalies. Machines can do that way, way better than humans. They can even write informative reports and quicker and cheaper. And I see that not as a problem, but I see that as an opportunity, because if there's one common complaint by intelligence officers and execs in general, whether they're Americans, Brits, Israelis, is that they don't have time to think. And because they're so overwhelmed, with day-to-day tasks. Well, machines can help us in that. They can give us the time to think. And this is what I call sense making. This is everything basically is under the umbrella of sense making, is freeing humans to focus on deep thinking on the expense of spending time on tedious work that could be done by AI.
Your mention of sense making is a great segue into the human side of intelligence. In fact, you devote an entire chapter to how intelligence professionals interact with the decision makers that they support. The terms of this relationship can hinder or enable the depth to which intelligence staff can understand and assist with crucial decisions. Historically, there has been some separation or even quasi-independence between intelligence organizations and senior decision makers to avoid unintentional or inadvertent bias towards the direction decision makers may want analytical support. In other words, even without intent, the analyst might structure collection or analysis to support where the decision maker ultimately wants to go. You and David Simintov propose instead what you call the collaborative approach. You lay out 3 dimensions for the role of national level intelligence. 1, intelligence isn't there to discover the truth because there isn't any ground truth when it comes to national level intelligence. 2, intelligence isn't valuable according to how it reflects an objective reality and instead becomes valuable only through its usefulness to a decision maker. 3, the essence of an open dialogue between intelligence and decision makers is to develop knowledge that feeds into policy, design, and implementation, a crucial contribution. The benefits of a collaborative approach appear to be substantial. The approach becomes very different than what you described as the typical relationship between the intelligence community and decision makers. During your discussion in your book, you cite one noted expert who says intelligence analysis at the strategic level cannot be deemed correct or incorrect, as it reflects an interpretation that serves the formulation of policy for a specific purpose, rather than universal policy. This removes the determination of right and wrong, but instead orients the entire process towards relevancy. The intelligence professional needs to be part of the development processes critical to decision-making. What are the obstacles? And aren't you concerned that said collaboration would drive the politicization of intelligence?
That's a terrific question. And the topic of intelligence and decision-making at the national level is probably the most debatable issue in intelligence studies, theory and practice. And it's not a new debate. It was already discussed back in the late 40s when Sherman Kent, the founding father of national intelligence, he tried to make he made the first attempt to theorize national level intelligence. And one of the topics that he addressed is indeed the relation between intelligence professionals and decision makers. To me, the debate whether intelligence professionals need to be remote from the decision makers and stick to the facts, and I'll get to that in a minute, what does it mean, versus an approach that is much more collaborative, which is my approach, it's an echo of a deeper philosophical discussion about objectivity and relativity. Now, we don't have time to delve into that, but let me suffice by saying that there are two main approaches. One is that there is an objective reality, and again, it's just a matter of collecting enough information, again, going back to the intelligence cycle, which is, by the way, a great manifestation of this objectivity oriented approach or philosophy, objective, kind of believing in objective reality. So there's information out there. We just need to collect, and then I'll be able to describe reality as it is. The other approach is much more subjective in nature, saying, and I'm not talking about postmodernism. This is not, it's kind of out of this of the scope of this discussion, but basically an approach saying that knowledge is always contextual. Now, I want to kind of double click on that. And in order to really understand, it's not an either or kind of debate. Again, reality is much more complex than that. It's both objectivity and relativity. The question is, what level of analysis are you referring to? So let's, for the sake of this argument, say that there are two levels of intelligence knowledge, if you will, and even human knowledge. One is the tactical level, and the other one is the strategic level. On the tactical level, there's a very, it's an informational level. So a question for an intelligence officer would be, is there a tank over the hill there or not? And it's a fact, there's a fact that the tank is either there or not. It has nothing to do with sense making and really depends on whether you're an Israeli or an American. It's either there or not. So it's a factual kind of approach. On the strategic level, on the other hand, while strategic analysis need to rely on facts, what you make of it is really your interpretation of the facts. And let me give you an example. Do we know if Putin will withdraw from Ukraine or not in the next 3 months? I don't know. And there's no one piece of evidence, i.e. information out there that if I'll have the best sensors, I'll be able to get this information and problem solved. I will be able to tell decision makers he's gonna stay in Ukraine or not in the next 3 months. Even more so, Putin himself doesn't know whether he's going to be there or not in 3 months' time. So how can we, as observers, and we're not in Putin's mind, how can we try to understand and predict, what will be the future of the war in Ukraine? Mm-hmm. So going back to my argument, these are two different layers of knowledge. One is fact-based, and the other one is more about interpretation of and context in which knowledge is created. So going back to the intelligence and decision maker nexus, The problem with the traditional approach, as expressed by Sherman Kent and the intelligence cycle and all of that, is that it forces tactical logic on a strategic situation, right? If we support a clear distinction between intelligence and decision makers at a strategic level, intelligence can soon become less relevant because it doesn't root itself in the decision makers' world and concerns. And the decision makers are politicians, ultimately. They have a worldview. They were elected to execute on their worldview. You may or may not agree with it, okay? But you at least need to understand, national security strategy in what the president, for example, is trying to achieve, right? If you really want to serve him right as an intelligence officer. I'm not saying that we need to tailor our analysis to their needs. It's much more delicate than that. The collaborative approach is essentially different than the traditional one. And by the way, it's not new. It was first articulated by Wilmore Kendall back in 1949 as a response to Kent's book on national intelligence. So this debate goes way, way back. Now, to best describe my approach, this collaborative approach, let me stand on the shoulders of giants and let me loosely quote Robert Gates. So shortly after being appointed to the DCI, Director of Central Intelligence. So today we have the DNI, but the DCI was before that. So he was appointed back in 1999, and he argued that the interaction between intelligence and decision makers is a collaborative space where the two sides create discourse, and together they create knowledge. So creating knowledge is not just a task for intelligence officers. It's a collaborative effort. So it's not a one-sided event, so to speak, where intelligence delivers information to its consumer, and then the consumer decides what they want to do with that. Now, I want to emphasize the point that I made previously, that is not to say that there's no factual basis for intelligence analysis at the strategic level. It always needs to rely on facts. But here, intelligence organizations have an advantage. We spoke about competitive advantage, right? Because they have access to information, to unique information that otherwise is not available to their consumers or decision makers. But when they turn this information into knowledge, we are entering a interpretive space, which is all about collaboration, right? And it is assessed by its ability to support and to promote a certain strategy. And a strategy is a mental construct created by humans. Okay, this is what strategy. You're trying to achieve something that you believe in. So, and of course, there are risks and difficulties by applying this approach. Goes without saying. The book, one of the chapters actually discusses the potential pitfalls of such a collaborative approach. Just to name a few of these challenges. So oftentimes there's little trust between intelligence practitioners, executives, and decision makers, and we saw that with the previous U.S. president, but also in Israel and elsewhere. Sometimes decision makers don't share some of the information they have with their intelligence agencies because God knows why, and they have very good reasons for that. And sometimes intelligence officers present a certain analysis, and the decision maker decides not to adopt their perspective. Right. With full understanding of the implications and the trade-offs and all of that, because it's a matter of interpretation, it's a matter of philosophy, if you will. So, of course, there are risks of intelligence becoming too political. We've seen that multiple times in the past, especially around the war in Iraq. And there's the risk of intelligence becoming just a tool, basically, to justify in hindsight a certain policy. But to really implement this collaborative approach and to avoid its potential pitfalls, both intelligence professionals and decision makers need to be interested, first and foremost, in creating such partnership and acknowledge its benefits, and also acknowledges its risks.
And speaking of partnerships, now that we've really thoroughly looked at the partnership between decision makers and analysts, I also want to look at the private sector and government partnership. And in this one case, I'd like to start by sharing the title of a specific chapter in your book, Opening the Closed Intelligence System. That describes a gap and opportunity for the government to connect with and leverage the massive and groundbreaking collection and analytical capabilities run by the private sector. The insights historically developed by governments have become commercial products available from for-profit service providers and sometimes not-for-profit organizations. You cite 3 publicly known examples that look like traditional intelligence activities. 1, Bellingcat researchers on an ongoing basis investigate and release reports on security incidents, crime, and human rights violations. 2, the Forensic Research website in 2021 released a detailed report about an explosion at the port of Beirut. 3, Canadian Citizen Lab in 2021 published extensive research regarding the Israeli firm NSO that sells offensive cyber tools. These organizations use crowdsourcing, the darknet, and creative acquisitions of forensic artifacts, and they're not afraid to describe their methodologies. What do you see as the role of these organizations, all outside the government, in the changes that you advocate for in the intelligence community?
So I think there are 3 key lessons for intelligence communities here. First, the power of open source intelligence. What these organizations were able to do was to provide a very wide and deep picture of a certain event or phenomena using only information that is accessible to everyone, albeit sometimes hard to access. But these small nonprofit organizations, they have little budget. They don't rely on sophisticated sensors. They don't, and it makes you rethink the massive investment in intelligence capabilities. That proves my argument about the problem of intelligence agencies, which is basically to make sense of information that is already out there. You just need to find the way to grab it. So this should encourage ICs to fully utilize open sources. And I know that they already today there are tremendous efforts basically to harness open source or open sources for intelligence analysis. Second, these examples show us that in this day and age, it's hard to keep a secret. And intelligence professionals need to assume that even the most clandestine operations could be exposed, especially in a sensor-rich environment where data is publicly available. They need to take that into concern when planning sensitive intelligence activities. And finally, like the NSO example showed us, the availability of these open source information and tools and the availability of cheap but sophisticated intelligence capabilities should prompt decision makers to regulate this field sooner rather than later and to protect the public's right for privacy. Now, I see intelligence communities need to be part of such an attempt. Going back to my argument about collaborative approach, they need to work hand in hand with regulators. And again, I'm advocating this collaborating approach, right? Otherwise, they will find themselves in a reality that is imposed on them without any ability to influence, a new environment that both serves citizens and protects their privacy, and at the same time acknowledges the challenges that we face, terror and other challenges that require deep intelligence capabilities.
Regarding collaboration with outside entities, you identify the need for 2 concepts that we'll explore in greater depth: cross-int and prosumer. Let's look at cross-int, what you describe as a new intelligence discipline based on crowdsourcing, leveraging scattered knowledge from groups and organizations and individuals to generate diverse resources for organizations. You include a bunch of success stories on this front. DARPA in 2009 offered a cash prize to whoever developed an efficient system to find thousands of red balloons around the United States. And MIT leveraged social media to win it. Then in 2011, DARPA launched the Shredder Challenge to decode shredded documents. Some programmers in San Francisco won that one. The British government in 2011 ran a code cracking contest for the public. Can you explain for us why the existing intelligence disciplines don't cover crossint, with the existing disciplines being SIGINT, HUMINT, GEOINT, OSINT, and MASINT?
Yep. So crowdsourcing is essentially different from other intelligence disciplines. First, it doesn't require a level of secrecy because you approach large crowds. It's not limited to classic one-on-one interaction, as in human intelligence. You have an agent, you have the controller. Everything is done, kind of hush-hush. And it's not pure open source intelligence, which is passive by nature. Again, there's information out there, and we can just collect information from various open sources. Crowdsourcing and crossing involves a little bit of both, a little bit of all. So the human component of HUMINT, sure, of course. The open nature of OSINT, yes, but it isn't secretive since it involves approaching large numbers of people who in turn can provide information and knowledge that usually is not secret. And there are three use cases, if you will, for crossing or crowdsourcing in intelligence context. First, you can use crowds to collect information. Let me give you one example. The NGA and a company called Digital Globe, they launched a project a few years back, allowing the public basically to analyze geospatial information. So that saves time, money, and kind of engage with people who are passionate about these types of activity. The second use case is knowledge, the creation of knowledge, as expressed in a concept that is pretty common in the business world of open ideation and open innovation. So basically, you ask people to collaboratively develop new ideas, i.e. new knowledge. And third, and this is probably the most advanced application, at least for now, of crowdsourcing, forecasting. So there are a bunch of techniques like Delphi or prediction markets. There's an interesting project called the Good Judgment Project, led by Philip Tetlock. I highly recommend our listeners to read his book called Superforecasters. Again, it's all about using crowds to predict geopolitical events. And the idea is that the crowds not only have greater access to various sources of information, which in turn can save time and efforts for intelligence professionals, but more importantly, you can use the crowd to create a much more diverse environment that allow to overcome potential biases, which we know is a major problem in intelligence analysis, right? Because if you bring together a group, and by group, I'm not talking about 10 or 20 people, I'm talking about thousands and more than that. Well, you have people from various fields of expertise, different cultural background, ages, worldviews, and so on and so forth. So there's a room for debate between these worldviews. And that allows, and this is something that ICs all around the world miss. And crowdsourcing is a great opportunity here. And there's a next gen crossing or a next gen crowdsourcing. So with all the benefits of crowdsourcing, what's next is even more exciting because you can basically use crowdsourcing together with machines. So again, it's kind of a recurring theme in my book and in this conversation, because the future of intelligence is all about human-machine collaboration. And it is also relevant for crowdsourcing. You can tap into humanity's collective wisdom or collective intelligence, of course, by creating crowds and tapping into these crowds, but also to human knowledge as expressed in text. And again, it goes back to machine learning and a specific field in machine learning called natural language processing. So imagine that you bring together humans, you can ask them questions, they can converse and so forth, but you can also mine using AI other forms of human knowledge, scientific publications and so forth, and you can do that at scale. If you bring everything together, and so it gives a massive advantage for intelligence agencies, because you can literally tap into humanity's collective intelligence with very little effort.
I mean, it sounds like that changes everything. It really, you've got data, you've got analytical capabilities, you've got people comparing thoughts and methodologies with each other. It's really just so different than the traditional intelligence organizations or processes to embrace that type of breadth of understanding, perspectives, data, and whatnot.
Absolutely, and the good news here is that these technologies are already available, and these technologies could facilitate such a discussion, if you will, between humans and machines. But it really requires intelligence organizations to think differently and to be much more open to adopting new approaches and to adopting new technologies, and to remove traditional barriers.
As far as thinking difficulty, you identified creativity, not in its usual context, as essential to take advantage of technology opportunities. Your concern is that intelligence organizations tend to think in silos. To expand on what creativity means, you cite the work of Josh Kerbel regarding intelligence cognitive pathology. What about Kerbel's work is helpful towards avoiding bias in intelligence thinking? What needs to happen for the intelligence community to embrace the type of creativity you're advocating?
So let's start with your second question. To really embrace creativity, intelligence communities need to want to change. And the good news is that they realize that it's time for such a radical transformation. We discussed that at the very beginning of our conversation. And it's not trivial, because these organizations, especially when they are large government organization, they tend they don't like the unknown. They tend to resist change. So you need a sense of urgency, which there is. You need them to realize that there is a gap between how they perceive themselves and what is required from them, in how the environment in which they operate sees them, for example, the public or the political echelon. And once this gap exists in their minds, then that's the very first step for adopting new approaches, creativity being one of them. Okay, so the time is right for bringing in creativity to the intelligence community. And again, creativity is not something trivial when dealing with huge conservative organizations such as the IC. Because creativity is all about innovation. It's all about working dynamically in a flexible way of thinking. It requires holistic thinking, and this is what Kerbel discusses. It requires the ability to bring together ideas that are seemingly unrelated. It requires imagination. Attempts to imagine how this rapidly changing world is going to look like in the foreseeable and less so future. So decision makers can basically start acting based on current understanding, right? Now, if we stick to the traditional approaches of intelligence, again, as expressed in the intelligence cycle, there's very little creativity in that. I'll be even harsher, and I'll say that there's very little creativity in the intelligence cycle. It's very prescriptive. So what I like about Kerbel's approach is that he suggests a roadmap for creativity. For example, embracing failure as a learning opportunity. Again, let's look at the business world. Let's take a look at the venture capitalists. They usually fail in their investment. Only a handful of investment actually succeed. But it's not just that they count on the numbers, right? So when something succeeds, it really generates a lot of money. They build on their failures. They learn from that. They improve. This is the whole kind of startup mentality, right? We try, we fail, we try again, and next time we try, we are slightly better. So failure needs to be part of IC's DNA, right? And to learn from failed experiences. Now, a culture of innovation and creativity needs to trickle all the way down the org chart. And IC need to encourage experimentation of crazy ideas, collaboration with the private sectors and academia along all the tiers of the organization. They need to be able to bring new methodologies and new ideas from seemingly unrelated industries. We mentioned marketing. That's one example. I think that there's a lot to learn from the gaming industry around how to motivate people and how to think creatively about problems that are also relevant for intelligence community. And finally, and probably the most important step that ICs need to take in order to enable such creativity is to be much more diverse. Now, we mentioned crowdsourcing, right, which is one such vehicle for creativity. But I think that if you really want to be creative and think out of the box, that requires various perspectives about reality. And intelligence personnel need to be as diverse as possible, again, to avoid biases such as group thinking, to bring new perspectives, and so forth. So creativity is, diversity is key here.
Absolutely wonderful, Shay. We covered a lot today. JSOU appreciates your sharing regarding your deep insights into a roadmap for an intelligence community that supports decision makers and all intelligence consumers. This revolution can help planners, analysts, and leaders in the special operations community and beyond. Your book, The Future of National Intelligence, How Emerging Technologies Reshape Intelligence Communities, describes a sense of urgency and the way ahead to reshape the intelligence community. Even starting down the path you described moves the ball forward and gets us closer to the optimal change and new capabilities for an intelligence community of the future. Thank you, Shay, for enabling the special operations community to understand your actionable analysis and recommendations.
Thank you, Mitch.